Good afternoon, all of you, my dear colleague, researcher, scholars, and participants, and esteemed guest. Welcome back to the afternoon session of our faculty development program on envisioning the future, multidisciplinary research approaches in research on languages and literatures. We are excited to continue with the discussions and insights that will further enrich our learning experience. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Ramakrishnan R. Sir, Senior Faculty at the School of Design Thinking. Sir has extensive experience in design thinking with a focus on integrating creative problem solving into various sectors, including education, business, and government. He has been involved in a variety of workshops and training programs aimed at transforming the mindset towards user centered design and has played a key role in conducting design thinking workshop for corporates, academic institutions, and government bodies. I'm proud to say that I was part of one such training. Sir's unique ability to fuse literary creativity with design thinking methodologies has earned him recognition in both academic and professional circles. His current work emphasizes designing systems that leverage empathy and user-focused solutions. A concept he brings into today's session, literary inspiration to design thinking. This session will explore how literature and creative thinking can inspire innovative thinking in design processes, opening new avenues for cross-disciplinary collaboration. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ramakrishnan R as he takes us through the fascinating topic. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to Pungudi, ma'am, and good afternoon to all my dear participants here who joined this afternoon. Uh, it was actually pretty surprising when Dr. Poonam reached out to me saying that she wanted me to anchor a session. I don't know, probably it was the discussion we had on Othello on the first day of our program here when you were here in our office. Right?
I'm happily
I'm trying
surprised that you still remember that, sir.
Oh, yeah, I do. I do. It was a very interesting topic, brief one, but it was very interesting. It took me back to my college days when I as a literature student used to study all this in great detail. But that's the interesting thing, because when you start looking at opportunities and start looking at how do you solve problems, there's so much inspiration around in the world that you can actually look up to and get insights and inspiration from, that helps us in solving problems, that helps us in giving us different ways in approaching how do we look at problems in the first place, right? So that is what kind of inspired me when you invited me. I thought, okay, let me try to put some thoughts together on that and see how I can kind of tie it up to design thinking, because design thinking as an approach takes a lot of inspiration from various domains, various industries, and that's what we'll be seeing today. So just as the topic is, it's all about literature and how literature inspires people to look at opportunities, to look at problems, to look at the stakeholder from a different perspective. So we will try to demystify this as we go forward. Since it's an online session, I would have to share my screen. I hope that is okay. So let me begin. Yep. Right. So that is my topic for the day. So it's looking beyond for inspiration when design thinking looks at literature for ideas. And as I said, there are so many different domains, so many different industries, so many different professions, so many different sources that we can get inspired by, right? So being an FDP by the English department, I thought, okay, I'll focus purely on literature to see how that helps us when you're looking at opportunities. But before we actually get into the process of what it is, I have some questions for you all. Dr. Poonam ma'am had introduced you all, right, saying, dear peers, dear research scholars and others. So being academicians here, part of our job also involves, looking at problems. So I have a couple of questions for you before we actually get into the session, and I hope that's okay. The first question is, what inspires you to actually get into research, right? Is it something that came from your personal life? Is it an observation from society? Is it some inspiration that you said, aha, when you saw a movie, right? You probably watched a movie like Lucky Bhaskar or Amaran or something like that, right? Or any movie that you typically, or series that you watch. Did something from that inspire you to say, okay, why don't I look at this or apply this in my research? No, those kind of things. Or how does literature influence other domains? Are you aware of opportunities? Are you aware of areas where literature has played a role in coming up with a great solution? Right? Maybe there are. I'm not sure, but for a fact, literature inspires a lot of people, right? I mean, that's why you continue have to have this as an intense field of study. Another question: have you ever looked beyond your subject for ideas? Again, going back to that fundamental question, when we get into research, we get so deep into what we are looking at, what we are delving into, right? But has that kind of blinded us and not made us look beyond for inspiration, right? Ideas that can connect. And we look at some very interesting examples during this session. And probably one final question. Now, since we are talking about inspiration, I want you all to probably take a few minutes, a minute or two, to understand where do you look for inspiration, right? In whatever it is that you do. It can be in the daily rigmarole of your life, right? How you do things.
Hello,
It can be.
hello.
Yes, sir. Hello. Hello. Am I audible?
Sir, you are audible.
Okay, okay. Somebody I thought wanted to ask a question. Okay. So the idea is, where all do you look out for to get ideas, to be inspired, right? Can even be a role model, right? For example, I mean, you look at people in childhood, they say, you need to be like Hanuman, or you need to be like Krishna, or you need to be like Arjun, discipline. You look at various other forms of literature. You look at other religions, you say, you need to be the perfect human being. So look at the prophet or look at Jesus Christ. So wherever we look, right, it can be a role model, it can be a story, it can be a parable, it can be anything. But is there something that inspires us to put greater effects in whatever it is that we do, right? So that's what I wanted to ask, because all this is completely based on that. How do we look beyond our current domain, our horizon that we are so used to, and get ideas from sources beyond that? So this is tied very closely to this concept called design thinking. And as Dr. Poonam ma'am introduced, right, she used some very interesting terms when she was talking about design thinking. Uh, what is design thinking? Why is it important, right? And why am I using that here to kind of talk about connecting it to literature and looking beyond for inspiration? Because that is the entire theme of this FDP, right? So what does design thinking have to do with literature, or vice versa? Literature have to do with design thinking, and what inspirations can we get? So first of all, let us try to demystify what design thinking is. So that's when you can kind of get more insights, more ideas about all this. So what is design thinking? Design thinking is an approach where you look at opportunities to solve problems. You look at opportunities to come with great products, great services, great institutions, right? And the biggest difference between a design thinking approach to come up with to solve problems, to come up with any a product or a service, vis-a-vis other forms, is that design thinking keeps the end user at the center. It keeps the customer at the center and builds the entire ecosystem around it. For example, when you are teaching a student, a postgraduate student or an undergraduate student, right, fresh out of school, how do we design the pedagogy in such a way that the student is completely immersed in that subject, right? The student stays very focused in class, is so rooted in the way we teach, right? And is able to absorb whatever it is that we're teaching, right? So that is the first and the foremost aspect of design thinking. It has to be human-centered, and after that, you work on the other things. That said, design thinking also focuses on the future. In India, there is this very popular term that we use while fixing things called jugaad. It's a Hindi term largely used in the north. Basically, it means that, okay, I have a problem now. How do I solve the problem with the current constraints or the current things that I have, right? In fact, if you look at it, that's what our parents since our childhood have been teaching us, right? It's about, okay, you earn 1 lakh rupees a month. How do you maintain your household? How do you maintain your monthly expenses within that 1 lakh rupees without taking loans, without borrowing, right? So it basically goes to the fact, how do I solve issues keeping what I have in mind? There is a very interesting proverb in English, right? To cut one's, to stitch one's coat according to the cloth. So I don't buy the cloth based on the size that I am. If I'm a 6 footer, 6.5 footer, I don't buy cloth for that. If I have a very definite amount of cloth, I try to make do and stitch my coat according, right? So I do with what I have. That's what Jugaad is. But in design thinking, we don't do that. We try to see what is the outcome, and to achieve that outcome, what do I need to have today, right? So it is not based on limitations, it is based on possibilities. That's the biggest difference between typical way of looking at problems and solving it vis-a-vis a design thinking approach. And finally, design thinking creates value. What do I mean by value? There is a problem today, my solution is implemented, my service is being used, and I solve that problem. So there is a delta, there is a difference between what is and what will be having used my product or my service, right? So that is the value that design thinking has. So what are the differences between design thinking, an approach of design thinking to solve problem versus a traditional approach? I thought I'll just get this clear at the outset before we look at inspiration, because then we'll slowly get into the details of design thinking. And there are 2-3 areas where literature plays an immense role, right? So just to give you the background before we delve into that, I thought I'll get into so much detail. Now, if you look at a traditional way of solving problems vis-a-vis a design thinking approach, this could be the biggest differentiator. Since school days, since the day we joined kindergarten, probably, right, till the day we probably finish our doctoral theses, get a doctorate, and get into our profession, right? It's always been, what's the right answer? This is the problem. This is the issue that we are facing. Tell me what the answer is. Irrespective of the subject, irrespective of the domain, it's always, this is the question, give me the right answer. But interestingly, in design thinking, we don't do that, right? The answer is there, but to get the right answer, if you notice in this statement, the question, the adjective is the right answer, right? So the thing is, or the adverb, sorry, right? Answer is a verb. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? So the thing in design thinking is, to get the right answer, you need to first of all ask the right questions, right? So design thinking doesn't focus on the answer, it focuses purely on the questions. The second thing is, in a traditional way of teaching, in a traditional way of solving problems, there's a lot of talking, something like what I'm doing here, right? But if you actually would like to use the design thinking approach, because it's all about the end user at the end of the day, we don't talk so much. What do you think will be the approach? I mean, seeing this picture over here, could anybody from the audience tell me what would be the design thinking approach?
Ma'am, sir,
Yes.
listen more.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Listen to the customer, because the customer will tell you what the problem is. The student will tell you where the pain point is for him or for her, right? So it is more about empathetic listening, trying to understand the problem of the customer by listening to their issues first. In traditional thinking, it's all about data, right? You have this huge behemoth called the School of Computing in SRM, right? Famous for that, right? Tons and tons and tons of students every year come and join SRM because you have a terrific department of computer science, data analytics, AI, ML, IoT, this, that, everything, right? World is driven by technology. And so obviously, again, going by that cliched usage, data is the new oil, right? And so everything is data. However, in design thinking, there's a subtle difference. We don't focus so much on the data. We do. Data is absolutely necessary. But we go a little more beyond the data. What we focus is on the stories. Now, what is the difference between a data and a story? Data typically tells you what has happened. It tells you how many cars went down a particular road. It tells you that in a particular event, so many people turned up, right? In this FTP session, there are, I don't know how many people, because I'm only looking at my screen. There are probably 30, 35 people logging in and listening in right now. But design thinking tells you
44.
about the story. 44. Thank you. Thank you very much. 44 of you listening, right? Now, design thinking tells you what is the experience that you're getting out of it. Is the rendition correct? Are you able to connect with the person who's presenting? Are there queries that you have? Is there an opportunity for you to ask questions, right? So it goes more at the personal level. It goes more at the why. So if data tells you what has happened, stories will tell you why it has happened, right? That is the level in which the importance is given to stories in design thinking. In traditional thinking, it's all about events, very similar to data, right? So many FTPs have happened, so many batches have graduated from SRM, so many meetings have transpired thus far. It's all about events and all that. But in design thinking, we go a little bit beyond the event, right? We know that there are so many classes in a particular semester, that a particular paper has so many credits, which translate to so many lecture hours, so many hours of tutorial and practicals and so on. But at the end of the day, what is the experience of the student? Does he or she like the particular session? How does the faculty connect to the student in the classroom, outside the classroom, using technology, using stories, right? So it's all about the experience of the end user, right? So that is the focus of design thinking. And finally, traditional thinking is all about facts. It all talks about, again, numbers and events and calendars and the what have yous, right? All about science, pure algorithm. But design thinking, from listening to stories to experience, what do you think design thinking will focus on? If the right side column, that under design thinking, is all about the individual, what do you think would be the element over here? Anybody?
Analyzing the facts, sir.
Interesting. Analyzing the fact. Okay.
Customizing it according to that customer.
Customizing a fact according to the customer.
Not
Okay.
fact, like giving him the kind of solution which would be only for him and not the generic. Like when we talk about the facts, we talk about the generic facts, but the thing which is
Okay.
suitable to that particular customer.
Very interesting, but that's an outcome.
Implications, sir.
So maybe the recognition of a pattern out there.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Try to go a little within the individual.
Implications, sir.
Implication is more of an outcome, right? I do
The
something. What is the
connecting with the
implication of
fact,
doing something?
connecting with the fact, connecting with the facts.
Connecting with the fact.
Sir, maybe context. Maybe the context.
Okay. No. Go within. Go within. See, you are listening to somebody. You are understanding the story about the person. You are understanding the experience of the person going through. Let us stay with the student, for example, right? What is the experience of the student in the classroom, right? So if in traditional way of approaching or solving problems, if you're looking at
Solution,
fact,
sir. Solution.
no, solution is the outcome. We are not with the solution yet. We are still with understanding the problem or
Then
even
suggestion.
understanding the customer.
Suggestion.
No. It is, okay. You might laugh when you see this out. It's all about the feelings of the person, the emotion, the experience, right? You have a very nice lunch, you feel happy, right? If you have a bad lunch, you don't feel that happy. You're in a hurry to go for a meeting, but the elevators are all full, there is no space or there's no way to go up. How is the experience? And an experience always relates to a certain feeling. It's either a happy feeling or a sad feeling, or you feel angry, right? So that is what design thinking is all about. Design thinking focuses on the customer, on the person, and then it delves into the bigger issues actually, right? It doesn't exactly start straight away get into the solution. It starts with a question and focuses more on the person facing the problem than actual problem itself. So that brings us to the question, Why do we need design thinking? I mean, we have been taught about solving problems since the day we are born, right? I mean, our parents used to tell us, learn by yourself, or we read in the newspaper, right? Okay, there was a problem, the government brought in various stakeholders, the collector of a district had a meeting, or the CM had a meeting. We had rains, right? The cyclone Fengal recently, right? So when it was inundated in certain places, how do you solve the problems? So a lot of things happen. But if you actually look at it, especially talking of cyclones and water issues in Chennai, this has been going on for like every year since, I mean, as much as we can remember, right? Every year you have a cyclone, every year you have a problem. There's too much water. Then comes summer, April, May, June, no water at all, right? You see water trucks going across the city supplying water. And the unfortunate thing is that this happens every time, every year, and we don't learn. We only try to find a quick fix solution to get out of that problem currently. Jugad, as I said, right? Now that there are places in Velachari that are flooded, what do you do to assist the people over there? Give them biscuits, give them milk, give them food, right? Take care of them, give them medicines. But what's the long-term solution? A solution that makes everybody happy, right? But that's when design thinking comes into play, because design thinking helps us to elevate ourselves from being an order taker. And that's what we are. Every year, nature plays with us, excessive rains, cyclones, and all that. And we end up taking order from nature, saying that, okay, this is some, what do we do to solve the problem? But design thinking helps us to move from being an order taker to a person who's setting the agenda, which basically means I am now going to tell my customer, I am now going to see how I can look at an opportunity and set the trend for the market, right? It's a big shift. It is like a company like Infosys and Cognizant to a company like Apple and Tesla, right? What's the difference in a company like Infosys and Cognizant? They take orders from the customer, they design the product, and they give the product back to the customer. The IP or the product is the customers, not Infosys or Cognizant. Vis-a-vis, if you look at a company like Tesla or Apple, right? They own the product. You are buying the product from them, but the IP of the product still continues to be with them, right? That is what you mean by an agenda setter. Close to 20 years ago, when a company like BlackBerry was thinking of adding more buttons to its keyboard, I'm sure all of you would have seen a BlackBerry or seen an image of a BlackBerry phone. It was supposed to be the what do you say, the possession of pride of very successful corporate executives. Everybody will be having a BlackBerry, composing an email on that device. And a couple of kilometers away, there was this gentleman called Steve Jobs who said, why should a phone have so many buttons? Why can't a phone have just one button in the center or wherever that helps to switch on or switch off the mobile, and everything within is a widget or an app, right? So he changed. And today, how many of us actually have a feature phone? All of us have smartphones, right? So that's the thing. That's what a great design can do. And finally, the alignment to the bigger purpose. Why are we here doing what we are doing? I am an order taker. The university sets the curriculums. The university sets the agenda for the day, right? I work on that curriculum. I see what needs to be done. I work on a pedagogy and I teach that to my students. From being such an institute, right? How can I shift and say, I'm the person who's going to design the curriculum for the student, because I really understand what the student needs, what the industry needs, and I have the wisdom to meet them, right? Meet the gap or fill the gap, right? That is the higher purpose. What is it that my student needs? Does my student need a placement at the end of the year? Or does my student need a great life ahead, right? I'm not looking at just an opportunity to fish, but I'm going to teach that student how to fish, right? So that's the thing. It's not about looking at the smaller outcomes, but the larger purpose of life. That's when we use design thinking. And quickly moving forward, design thinking it's a journey, right? It basically starts with how do we do things right? So it starts with doing something. Enough of theory, enough of talking. Can we get into practice? Two, are we doing the right things? Now that you're doing things to trial and error, right? How do we know what is the right thing to do? To finally, how do we decide as a community, as a group of stakeholders, decide what we need to do? So that's typically what design thinking is. I thought, okay, I'll now slowly get into the literature part of it. But before that, I just wanted to demystify an approach to design. So when we are designing something, it can be anything. It can be the curriculum for a particular subject. It can be the design of a classroom. It can be the design of an FDP program. It can be the design of our kitchen, of our home, anything and everything, right? So there are certain different ways to design. Here is one way in which we can look at how a thing is designed. It all starts, first of all, with understanding, as I said, the customer, right? Who is the customer? What does the customer want? Why does a student join SRM? Why is that student going through the English course in SRM? Why is the student taking up the foreign language, Japanese or German or Russian or whatever it is, right? What is the purpose of that? Many a times we go with a stated requirement. The student says, okay, I am learning computers. I am learning data analytics or AI, ML or whatever. I would also like to learn German because I plan to do my master's in Germany. And so that is the stated requirement, right? And English department offers foreign languages. So I'm a part of this department. But there is also an unstated requirement. The things that the customer will not state, the things that the student will not state, because the student does not know how to state it. It's more at an experience level, right? For example, one of the examples that I like sharing, and just because it's post lunch, right, kind of quickly came to my mind, is when you go to a restaurant and when you go to have food, your stated requirement is what is there in the menu. Probably you would have already had something prefixed in your mind, like having a plate of biryani and some sweet. But the unstated requirement behind that is how clean the restaurant is, how good the car park is where you park your vehicle, right? How neat the restrooms are. How does the server come to you, the waiter come to you with a smile, offering you water, giving you the menu card with some courtesy and all that, vis-a-vis throwing it on the table, right? So these are all the unstated requirements that are there. And when all these are met, along with the stated requirement, that's when you feel like, wow. So when the student comes to the Department of English and Foreign Languages and enrolls for a certain program, when the student gets what he or she has applied for, in addition to some nice experiences, to some additional value-added programs, that's the unstated thing that the student is not probably aware of. But in the journey of the student, it adds so much value and they absolutely love it. So understanding the requirement comes first. And once you understand the requirement, then you get into the problem, right? It's not yet with the problem. You start observing patterns and you observe anti-patterns. Now, what is a pattern? What's an anti-pattern? A pattern is anything that gives you the outcome that you want. If, for example, I would like to get a first class 90% in my English paper, I follow a certain discipline. I attend all my classes. I'm regular to the programs. I do my assignments. I publish, I present, and I volunteer for debate competitions and poetry and so on and so forth. That's a pattern. An anti-pattern is, I come from, say, Tenampet or Saidapet. There's a long journey for me to come to KTR campus. And despite having done all that, on the day of the exam, on D-Day, right, when I have to go write my paper for which I've prepared so well, suddenly my bus meets with an accident, or there's a breakdown, or I fall and I break my hand, or whatever. Something happens that does not let me write the exam. So what happens? I finally end up writing in arrears. And so my opportunity to school to get a gold medal is lost because of that one unseen thing that happened that stopped me from performing at my best. That is what we call an anti-pattern, something that does not allow you to reach the goal that you want. Now that you understood the problem, then only you come to the solutioning part. And typically we connect the dots, which basically means the human mind is a brilliant tool, right? It is a tool that has been trained since infancy to look at logic, to come up with solutions. So it is very natural that when we are trying to create a syllabus, when you're trying to create a curriculum for a certain program, you look at inspiration, you look at other universities to see how they have done it. You probably will look at Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU, you'll probably look at Madras University's English department. You might look at Pondicherry Central University. You might look at Kerala Central University. So you look at similar domains, similar institutions that teach English, right? Or it can be even a private university, or it can be an institute that evaluates students when they take up English as a foreign language, right? TOEFL exams and all that. But everything is logically connected. But history shows that great innovations happen when you are able to connect outside the box, when you look at inspiration from a domain that is totally different. which is exactly the theme of this FDP program, right? How do you look at different domains, different arenas, different areas to be inspired so that you get better insights? One of the stories that I remember having shared with Dr. Poonam during her FDP program here with us in our organization was the story of a hospital called Arvind Eye Care, right? I'm sure all of you are aware of this hospital. It's an eye hospital headquartered in Madurai, started in Pondicherry, but later moved on to Madurai. Now it has got branches in a couple of cities across the state and elsewhere. Now, why is this a very interesting aspect? Is because the philosophy of that eye hospital is to treat eye ailments to all people, irrespective of whether they can afford it or not. Which basically means that even if I don't have money, if I'm a daily wage laborer or a very poor farmer, I can still go to that hospital and get my cataract problem treated, right? And because that was the mission of the founder, Dr. Govindappa Venkataswamy, most of his patients were people who are below poverty line. And so what did this gentleman do? He needed money to treat them. He had to pay for his doctors. He had to pay the electricity bill. He had to pay for the medicine. So this doctor asked his consultants, right, what can I do to make money? Because I cannot go against my mission statement. I'm here to serve people, but money is something that's necessary. So what do I do? So his consultants, being typical consultants, told him, sir, why don't you look at the government hospital, right? Or why don't you look at the World Health Organization for inspiration? But Dr. Govindappa said, no, that won't work for me because they all have other sources of income. This is my primary bread and butter. So the story goes, and this is a case study that you can freely get on Google. So please search Arvind Eye Care, Dr. Govindappa, right? And also search the magic keyword McDonald's. Because Dr. Govindappa Venkataswamy says that his inspiration, right, looking out beyond, that's what I was talking at the outset. His inspiration to offer good treatment to customers and to meet the financial requirements of the hospital was inspired by McDonald's. Why? Because if you go to a McDonald's restaurant and you order for burgers, fries, and milkshake, you don't get it served on a silver plate with silver tumbler and paraphernalia and all that. You get it served on a plastic tray. The burger comes wrapped in a paper. The French fries comes wrapped in a cardboard box, and that's it. Right? You can eat it at the restaurant. You can eat it in your car. You can eat it while walking down the road. You can eat it anywhere. Right? In other words, they cut the cost of operations in McDonald's and they were able to expand the world over. Inspired by this, Dr. Govindappa wanted to know, can I do something? And what he learned was that, as we study in economics, right? A rupee saved is a rupee earned. So he didn't cut corners, he cut unnecessary cost. So instead of making a patient look at expensive tissue papers and napkins and all that, right, for hygiene factor, he said, why don't you just use a towel, which is about 20-30 rupees, buy a small bottle of Dettol, about 40-50 rupees, and use that to wipe your eye, to clean your eye. It serves its purpose, right? And because he was able to cut unnecessary costs, he's able to expand the operations, covering more and more people without, pinching corners, actually. So that is the beauty of connecting the dots outside the box. And finally, unearthing blind spots, right? Blind spot is something that you don't know that you don't know. And that comes often as a very nasty surprise because you're ready with something, you're ready with an entire curriculum for a particular course, right? You're offering a new program in your department. And suddenly there are not many takers and you try to, go back and do a post-mortem to see what failed. And you notice that certain elements of it didn't meet, right? So it's very important that you unearth blind spots as soon as possible, as early as possible, leveraging experience and all that, and try to come up with it. But going back one step ahead, focusing on outside the box. In design thinking, this is a very, 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 very important aspect because I'm sure all of you would have heard about this very interesting exercise that we do, brainstorming. Anybody who has not done brainstorming at all thus far in whatever part of their career or even in their personal lives? I doubt. I'm sure that all of us at some point or another would have done brainstorming, right? Coming up with as many ideas as possible. Very, very important because brainstorming is a wonderful tool in design thinking. And this is what connects to literature. If you're wondering where is it, I mean, Ram said he's going to talk about literature and still he's talking about design thinking. Where does literature fit in? I'm coming to that. Just give me a few more minutes. Right? So when we talk about brainstorming, it is all about getting ideas, getting wacky ideas, strange ideas. It's all about saying, okay, how many ideas can I get to solve this problem? And as psychology says, right, if you're a team of say 5 to 10 people, right, from diverse fields trying to understand a problem and come up with ideas, there is only so many ideas that people come up with. Probably after 15 or 20 ideas, you will say, Ram, I'm sorry. I mean, that's all. My brains run dry. I can't do anymore, right? And that's when we force ourselves to come up with more ideas. It's like going to the gym and, working out, right? You do so many reps with the dumbbells and all that, your muscles ache and they say, I can't do anymore. And then you say, no, give me 2 more, give me 3 more, right? Or while doing push-ups and all that, right? The same thing actually happens when you're brainstorming. Your mind says, enough, I can't take it anymore. But that's when you force yourself to come up with more ideas. And trust me, that's when the craziest of ideas come. And from the craziest of ideas, when you get brilliant, brilliant, brilliant solutions. So are there ways to push your brain from looking beyond mere logic into very illogical ideas, into very fancy ideas? Yes, there are. And English teaches us a lot of things in that, right? For example, the beautiful thing called metaphor and simile. In brainstorming, we actually use metaphor. This picture that you see to the left, right? The guy dressed up as a star. And there's the statement, he is a star, right? That's a typical metaphorical usage where you're identifying one entity with another entity, right? You're not comparing, you're identifying it as that. So we say in brainstorming, is there a possibility where you can identify your problem with something that is totally different? For example, what were the things that Shakespeare faced as a challenge when he wanted to come up with those beautiful dramas of his, right? And when you're trying to do research and come up with ideas on that, right? Probably a metaphor can help. For example, how do you inflate the air in the tire of your car? Now, what does that have to do with Shakespeare's plays? Nothing at all. But when you're forcing your brain to make connections that even probably do not exist, that's where the creative part of your brain starts getting fired up. Because friends, as I said at the outset, education has made us think so logically. All that mathematics, all that science, all that logic that we study in school, right, and college, that's made us think so logically. But it's when you become creative, illogical, that really weird thing starts to happen. Simile, for example, also a great tool. As cool as a cucumber, right? So can you make those connections that actually help? That is when the magic happens, right? And that is why there are so many advantages of having a multidisciplinary approach. Today, I'm sure all of you would have heard of this concept called liberal arts. I think 2-3 days ago in the Hindu's editorial page, I think it came on Friday, last Friday, wherein Nirmala Rao, the Vice Chancellor of Kreya University, actually came up with a nice article on liberal arts and what are the challenges and the pros and cons that that area of study is facing, right? But the beauty of a multidisciplinary approach when you're looking at things is that it opens your mind into so many different ways, just like the bulb image that you see here, right? Different connections. Your neurons are connecting to different elements. For example, one thing is that it enriches research by offering diverse perspectives. You connect the dots outside the box. You say, okay, if I have a problem in scripting a play, right? How does a computer programmer write a line of code to create a software, to create an app? Is there something that logically connects? Or how does a bus driver move from Chennai Central to Mahabalipuram, right? Across all that traffic, all that road. Is there something that I can learn from a bus driver, right? So the idea is that it makes you look in so many different ways, think in so many different aspects, and that enriches things. As I said, Arvind Eye Care and McDonald's are a great example. Probably another very obvious example is the design of your bullet train, right? Japan is famous for the bullet trains, right? What inspired them? They were inspired by nature, by the kingfisher, right? To see how the design of that bird reduces friction, reduces noise. As this train travels at immense speed, it creates a lot of noise. How can that be reduced? The second thing is that it fosters innovation, right? Innovative research questions. How do we question assumptions? How do we ask the right questions? So when we look at different approaches, when you look at medicine and see that, okay, what inspired the heart-lung machine? That is so important, right? The ventilators and on all that. That is so important for a patient to survive, right? It's probably your mechanical engineering and your electronic engineering that came together, that came up with a heart-lung machine, right? So it makes you think on different lines. The other thing is that it leads to more nuanced interpretations of what you have learned, finding deeper meanings, unearthing unstated requirements, hidden problems in a seemingly obvious problem statement, right? Other things that are deeper. It's very interesting. I mean, just out of this thing suddenly came to my mind. How many of you have watched this Tamil movie, Kamal Hassan movie called Papanasam, acted by Ajay Devgan and Tabu as Drishyam in the Hindi version? Brilliant example. So it's probably a bad example, but it shows how a person connects to movies, to cinema, to solve real life problems. You know, the way, I'm sure those of you who watched the movie know what I'm speaking about, right? He was able to connect with different movies, different things, right? Because he says that his education was all cinema, right? He learned so much from cinema, and that's what helped him to come up from that problem. Not a good example to share, but that's what happens when you look at inspiration beyond what is obvious. And that's now where literature comes in, friends, because literature is exactly that. It's a great source to study humankind. And at the end of the day, what is design thinking? You might create a great product, you might create a great service, but at the end of the day, it's a person who's using that product or a service, right? And so when you look at literature, you're actually looking deeper into humankind to see how human beings interact, the problems that human society faces, right? And to see what problems can we solve. Any guesses from which movie or which character this boy is? Anybody?
Want some more. I don't know the movie, but I can connect with the novel. Charles Dickens.
Yes, and what's that novel? You're absolutely right.
Need more. Oliver.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes, this sweet little boy who's living in an orphanage walks up to the person who's serving, saying, "Sir, I need some more." And all hell breaks loose. They say, "How dare does this boy ask for a second helping?" If I'm not wrong, it's Oliver Twist. Right?
It's Oliver Twist.
Yes.
It's Oliver Twist, right? Yeah. So just a spark of this thing. So how can we solve problems, right? So it teaches us a lot about society. Right. So if you look at it, if you look at great works such as the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, right? It basically introduces to various cultures, various belief systems and all that. And that's where the beauty is, because it reflects human society. It reflects the way we connect. It reflects the way we understand the belief systems and all that. And ultimately, as I said, we are talking about human beings. So let us look at when literature inspires, how does it actually connect with design thinking? Just very few quick steps. So this what you see right over here: empathy, ideation, prototyping, testing, communication. These are the various stages, various facets of design thinking. Now, if I'm at a stage where I'm actually looking at ideation, right, empathy and user research, right, character studies that we typically do in research plays a big role. Thematic analysis of a novel or the plot or the context in which the story is set helps us a lot about it. For example, I forget this very interesting novel. It is about a poor man who is in extremely dire situation, and he's at the pub, he's drunk, and he sells his wife and daughter. And later on, he becomes a big person in society, but that
The
tragedy
mayor of
still
Castlebrits.
absolutely. Thank you. Right. Today, when we are looking at problems in society, women's issues, societal issues, evils, regarding women, these kind of things actually help us, because it tells us what drives a person to that drunkenness. Because I believe poverty and his state of being a drunk in that pub is what made him do that, right? So it's a great context for us to understand society deeper. If you're looking at ideation, Metaphorical thinking, again, a way in which we come up with content, helps us. Prototyping and testing. How do we do literary prototyping? Different styles of writing, different genres of writing, right? How can we prototype? If I want to tell a story, how can I make that story well? Can I make it as a, like a backcast? Is it something that goes behind in time, goes forward in time? Do I stay in real time? Different ways in which I can connect, right? So that is very, very interesting. Storytelling, different styles of writing, because in design thinking, storytelling plays a very important role. How do I connect, right? In design thinking, we have a framework called the 4 C's. Whenever we try to communicate with somebody, it is very important that we keep in mind these 4 C's. What are they? First, what is the content that I wish to communicate? The second C is, what is the context in which I wish to communicate that, right? To whom am I going to say that? In what context am I going to say that? What situation am I going to say that? The third is connect. What platform do I use to connect? Am I going to write an email? Am I going to give a speech? Am I going to write a novel? And finally, how do I do the communication part? So content, context, connect, and communicate. These are the 4 C's that we typically keep in mind while we are doing design thinking, right? And finally, user feedback, validation, iteration based on the validation that we get, the feedback, critical analysis that we do, the historical context of a setting in a novel. For example, when was that famous play of Shakespeare's, Hamlet, right? In which context was it done? What is the background of the story? All this plays a very, very important role. In fact, using user feedback, there's a lot of interesting things that have happened. Friends, do you know that actually there is a particular story called The Final Problem in the Sherlock Holmes series that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote. And his novels were so well accepted, his stories, that in The Final Problem, Sherlock Holmes actually dies fighting against his antagonist, Professor Moriarty. And the story goes that they wrestle each other, they fall, they jump from a waterfall, and they're supposed to die, right? However, when this story was published, when it reached to the public, there was a huge outroar. People said, no, we cannot let Sherlock Holmes die. I mean, we love that character. And so, because of the feedback they had, Arthur Conan Doyle had to bring back Sherlock Holmes back into society, saying that, okay, no, he didn't, he just slipped, he hid in a crevice, and after a couple of days, he came back, and so on and so forth. So that's how the next sequence of stories written by Arthur Conan Doyle comes, right? So that's the importance of user feedback. Sometimes it can bring back to life dead characters, right? So that is how it happens. Now let us look at some stories. Sorry, sir. Wanted to say something? Okay. Any guesses who this character is? Anybody? Any guess who this character is?
Mary Shelley character Frankenstein.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, ma'am. You're absolutely right. Written by Mary Shelley in 1818, right? Long time ago, right? About Frankenstein. Any guesses what this story is about? And how this connects to design thinking? But more about the story. Any guesses?
Sir, the design of creating him went wrong.
Absolutely. Yes. He came up with a product that went absolutely wrong, right? It went so wrong that it destroyed the creator, right? So that's the thing. So this character called Victor Frankenstein, who's a Swiss citizen, likes to dabble in science and the arts and what we call tantric and all that, right? So that was his character. And he gets this weird idea that let me play God, right? And so he goes to the graveyard, collects different body parts, and he puts together this, and science fiction of those days, he uses electricity or something like that, and he gives life to this monster, right? To Frankenstein's monster. And this monster came up with emotions of itself, just like Environ, right? Where Rajinikanth, despite being a robot, starts getting emotions towards Aishwarya Rai. So Frankenstein's monster also gets those emotions. It wants to be accepted in society, but people don't want it. They shoot away, they are scared, and they say it's so repulsive. And this monster feels so lonely, right? And it says, why did you create me in the first place? I don't like it. And it chases the creator, chases Victor Frankenstein. And the story ends, if I'm not wrong, somewhere near the North Pole in the Arctic Circle. It meets him and it kills him, right? So that is what the story is about. By the way, now that you kind of understand the plot, is there any movie that came in the not too distant past that is pretty similar to this? Wherein scientists try to play God, they come up and they create something, and finally that something destroys them, and they know that they cannot go against nature. Does any movie come to your mind? Very, very famous movie. It's an English movie. In fact, it's not one. There are 3 or 4 parts to it. Children love that character, usually.
It's Robo movie, sir.
What Robo movie?
I don't remember the name of the movie, but a person creates the robo, and the robo destroys others. It creates its own clones.
Okay, but then it's a robo, right? It's still something that is artificial. It doesn't have life. You're right. Okay, so that is something that goes out of control. Yes, there are many movies like that, but here they try to create something just like Frankenstein's monster. I'll give you a clue. It is something that died millions of years ago. No idea? Jurassic Park, right? The blockbuster movie, right? Jurassic Park. Then the part 2, part 3, part 4, and all that came up, right? So essentially, what happened? Somebody got the DNA of a dinosaur, they cloned it and all that. They added DNA of a frog from Africa and all that. They came up with the T-Rex, with the Triceratop, with the Velociraptor, and finally, what happens? They are not able to control it. Right? It goes completely out of control. So very interesting things, and this is what actually brings into the mind of a design thinker when they're looking at opportunities. For example, empathy, as I said right at the outset, right? It's the crux of design thinking. And what's empathy? It's putting the customer at the center, being in the customer's shoes, as we literally say, right? That is empathy. Now, if you put this movie, this particular story, Frankenstein, into context, it's all about understanding the monster's perspective, gaining insights into feelings of isolation, of rejection, longing for connection. That monster also wanted a mate. It wanted companionship, right? So how can you design things which are more inclusive in nature, which is not alien, which is accepted both by the user, right? And it gives a great experience. Or another aspect, anticipating unintended consequences, like that robo example that you, ma'am, said, right? I come up with a robo, I come up with a technology, and the technology goes out of hand. Today we talk of AI on similar veins, right? What will happen to my job? Can AI overtake the job of a facilitator, of a teacher, of a professor? Can AI take up the job of a data analyst, of a coder in an IT company? We don't know, right? We say that it will not happen. We just need to adopt it and use it appropriately. But you never know what the future holds in store, right? So considering the unintended consequences of the creature's creation can help designers identify potential risks and any negative impact of their work. When we are designing something, are we looking at it in its totality? Are we looking at it in the way it's going to impact my end user? Or are there going to be negative or repercussions that we might have to face later on? Challenging assumptions. Questioning the underlying assumptions behind every design that we do. Are we creating something that will truly benefit the society? Or is it because that I love this idea, I somehow it's caught my fancy, that I want to make it out, I want to bring it out into this world, right? Is that the thing, as we say, falling in love with the idea, and because I love the idea, I want to share it with the world, right? Moving on, exploring ethical dilemma, just as I said, like in Jurassic Park, right? Sparking discussions around ethical dilemmas in design. Like today we talk about privacy concern, data. I mean, I'm sure many of us have a lot of social media handles, right? Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Is our data safe, right? We post pictures with our family, with our loved ones, with our kids, and we know there are a lot of weird characters out there in society. So where is all that data? algorithmic bias, right? I have been a professor of English literature, and so I will look at the entire world wearing the lens of a literature professor. Sometimes that's not good as well, right? And the impact of technology on human relationship. How is this going to be an interface between two people? There are a lot of stories of how, uh, of how a couple who are separated by distance, they use technology to connect. And how does that play a role in their relationship? Or iterative design, the process of creating and making modifications subsequently, right? How do we try to learn and to refine our prototype so that we get a better outcome? User testing. How do we test how the people are connecting with our product? Insights on how users might respond to what we do, right? And reflecting on failures. Now that my product has failed and I know why it's failed, can I learn from my mistakes? Are there different scenarios that I've connected? If you probably recollect the approach to design that I showed you, I spoke about blind spots, right? So am I aware of all the blind spots? Am I taking effort to unearth the blind spots and try to test my product, test my whatever it is that I'm offering, the solution in different scenarios so that it connects and it works across all the scenarios? Let us look at one more example. Oh, okay, so there is one more thing called the ethical consideration, right? So what could go wrong if my problem is being used? Are there any ethical questions that I need to ask? So probably from Frankenstein, these are some interesting things that a designer can look at and probably be inspired by. 1984. How many of you have read this novel? Very, very interesting novel. You know who wrote this?
George Orwell.
Beautiful. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So would anybody like to briefly tell what this story is about? Whoever's read the novel?
So you'd be surprised to know that this novel, this time we brought into our syllabus so that the engineering students could read it.
Oh, lovely. Okay. Wonderful. Very apt also because it talks a lot about technology. It talks about a totalitarian society. In fact, that said, you should probably also look at one more novel that I'll be talking about in a bit. But thanks. It's a very interesting story, right? And probably it might remind you to the series that many of us are so addicted to, Big Boss, right? Always being monitored by a higher power, being dictated by the higher power, right? Being told what to do, what not to do, and so on. It's a dystopian novel, right? And as I said, it talks about surveillance, manipulation, control of information, and which is completely pervasive, right? It goes to the level of saying, right, if there is somebody who falls in love with another person, not allowed to. It all has to be regulated by society. And George Orwell probably got inspired by the Nazi regime when he came up with this, because this was released, I think, around 48, 49 or so, around that in the late 40s. And though his other novel, Animal Farm, talks a lot about communism, especially Soviet Russia under the rule of Stalin and others, Joseph Stalin, right? That too talks about how, there's dictatorship and all that, using animals as the characters over there, right? But what do we learn from this very interesting novel of George Orwell? Again, starting with empathy, right? How do we understand surveillance, right? By empathizing with characters who are constantly being monitored. The apps that we use in our mobile phone. How many of us know that our mobile phones are silent listeners? You assume it is silent. You assume that the internet is off, but there is some conversation in the bedroom that it observes, right? Very, very dangerous thing to take into the bedroom or take to a place where, you need privacy, right? So are you empathetic with your end users while designing something, especially when you're talking of a human being who needs privacy, who needs space and so on? How do you recognize the power of language? Because here we are talking of manipulation, we are talking of control, we are talking of a totalitarian society, right? So what is the power of the spoken word, of the written word? Again, a great novel that kind of brings this into perspective, right? Highlights the power of language to shape the thought and to control behavior. So mindful use of language can actually change people's perception. And there are so many stories that we have read, right? Wherein the way we communicate actually changes the way people's perceptions are monitored, right? Challenging authoritarian design, right? How do you prioritize control over user autonomy? Am I creating a solution? Am I creating an institution where the student has to only learn what I tell the student to learn? Or is the student also given freedom to choose what he or she wants to learn? For example, incidentally, I studied in a school, my middle school, in a school wherein we didn't have prescribed textbooks. I studied in a school called Rishi Valley. It's an institution founded by this philosopher called Judu Krishnamurti, where at the beginning of the year, we get to choose what we want to study, right? Now, that is not authoritarian. As a user, as a student, I decide what I want, right? So as a design thinker, can my customer decide what he wants? Can he be an equal stakeholder in the design of the product or the service? Probably in your case of the student. And can he or she also come up with a curriculum design that meets their aspirations as well, right? Moving on, again, iterative design, constant surveillance is required. Why? To modify. Remember, I spoke to you about listening. In design thinking, Dr. Poonam will be very well aware that there are 4 important skill sets that every designer should have: listening, observing, reading, and dialoguing, or to abbreviate it, LORD. Listening, observing, reading, and dialoguing, right? You need to use this constantly with your customers so that you can come up with better and better designs of whatever it is that you do. Ethical considerations. How important again is that, right? Being mindful of potential negative consequence of their work. Being completely a control freak is not good when you're designing. Every single time the customer needs an upgrade, he has to come to me or she has to come to me. And these kind of things that puts people off while designing. So drawing inspiration from 1984, can designers come up with more ethical, responsible, and user-centric products and services? Very interesting. The next novel, The Great Gatsby, right? See, I mean, literature is flush with inspiration and ideas. It's just that we need to connect with it. Okay, how many of you have read the novel or probably watched the movie?
Watch the movie.
Oh, okay, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, right? Interesting movie. Very interesting because it talks about the American dream. It talks about human relationships, behavior, societal trends, as you see here, and a very, very important trait of all human beings, the psychology of desire, right? I'm not happy with one. I want one more. I want a different type of an automobile. I want another phone. Things are good as they are, but we just want more and more and more and more. Now, how can design play a very important role here? And unfortunately, those of you who read the novel, or ma'am, as you said, watched the movie, you'll know that the novel actually ends with tragedy, right? The group go and the car crashes and they all die. But that apart, where do we learn? Again, empathy, persona, understanding people's want. What is it that they want, right? Job, position, money, luxury items, household, so many things, right? And by empathizing with characters like Gatsby and Daisy, interesting people, and Nick, you can gain insights into what is it that people really strive to achieve. Adding value of human connection. What is the importance of genuine human connection? So can we come up with products and services that brings people together, right? For example, the thing that you see in the red highlighted text over here. Create products and services that foster meaningful relationship. Can a mobile phone do that? Today, I'm sure in most of our households, right, across the dinner table, while you're having dinner as a family, you'll see each one of us having their mobile lost in our own world instead of connecting as a family. 20, 25 years ago, they said that of the television. I'm sure like when we were all in school, right, at least those of us who are like in our late 30s, 40s and 50s will know that then Doordarshan came and we all had a color TV in our home. They said, this idiot box is going to disrupt our life. It is going to pull each other away from ourselves. It's going to break the family. But we all know that on Sunday morning when Mahabharata or Ramayana was played, or the great Mughal or Chanakya or the sword of Tipu Sultan and all these seals, the entire family came together, right? We all are sitting. And there are stories when the neighborhood comes to a particular house to watch Ramayana and Mahabharata, right? So it actually brings people together. Coffee shops, places like Cafe Coffee Day, right? You don't just go there to have a cup of coffee. You go there to have a good dialogue, discussion with friends. You go there for job interviews. A lot of job interviews happen over there. Even cars. I mean, look at all the car advertisements in India. They don't talk about the engine below the hood, or they don't talk of displacement, and they don't talk of all that. They talk about a family visiting another family during Diwali, or they talk about, a son going home on vacation and meeting his parents. It all talks about human connection. It talks about aspiration. It talks about connection. I mean, bringing people together, right? So that's the thing about products. So can you think of products in those ways? Role of status, the products that we design, right? Like an Apple phone or an automobile. People associate themselves with the product that they have. The bigger the car, the richer they are, right? The more influential they are in society, right? So those are the things that brings to our mind when we read this novel. The power of symbolism, metaphor, right? So for example, the green light at the end of Daisy's dock, right? A phrase that comes in that, right? Talks about hope, desire of trying to get the unattainable, right? So again, all about people's want. Prototyping is another thing that's looked into. Aesthetics, unstated requirement of the customer, right? How are things more designed so that people love it, people connect with it, it gives them joy. And a very important thing, because Great Gatsby is all about desire and wanting, that's something beyond our reach. It connects to a very important law of design thinking, which is less is more. How do I balance ambition with responsibility? I want to be the dean of the department, right? With great power comes great responsibility, as they say. But along with that, am I mature enough to understand what are all that's going to come? It isn't just the power, right? I have a big car that I'm driving down the road. Am I cognizant of the fact that there are pedestrians walking around? There are stray animals that are walking around? Or do I just stay in that fancy car and, create accidents on all the way that I drive? So these are the things that this novel brings to our mind. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, right? Poonam ma'am, probably another very interesting novel that talks a lot about technology that you might want to introduce to the
Sir,
computer science.
even, yes, sir, we have. Even
Oh, you
Brave
have
New
this as
World.
well. Oh,
Yes, in
okay.
the syllabus.
Oh, lovely. Okay. Okay. Somewhere I synced. I don't know how, but I promise you that I just took this off because I like these novels. Right. So again, what does this novel talk about? It basically says that technology is used to control thoughts. How many of you watch this Christopher Nolan movie? That's a clue. There's a very interesting movie, old movie that came about 10, 15 years ago by Christopher
Inception.
Nolan. Inception. Exactly. Thank you, ma'am. Right. Which again, starred by DiCaprio, wherein, you through the dream, you start giving thoughts to people, make them behave in a certain way. This is not too different, right? How do you use technology to do that? And they do it so beautifully, because this again connects with our society in real world, right? So it talks of a very rigid society. It talks of a caste system. You have alpha, beta, gamma, right? In this brave new world, right? Where people are divided based on the role that they play, all the way from a leadership role to a laborer's role. And it talks about social stability. And funnily, when it talks of social stability, it brings about that stability by making people, being constantly a slave of pleasure, wanting more and more and more and more of anything, of food, of drink, of biological necessities, right? And it actually brings to our thought this novel, which was written not too in the distant past, actually talks a lot about society today. Those of you who have read a little bit of world history would know that in ancient Rome, when the emperors wanted to keep the crowd under control, the poor citizens under control, they used to launch free circus, like gladiator shows and all that, right? It was completely free. The emperor used to give free bread and some drinks, and for the entire day, probably for an entire month, these shows were run non-stop, right? Today we have politicians who give freebies just to control the population, right? So that's how beautifully this novel connects. I mean, it does talk so deep into the human psyche. Again, sorry, it talks of human empathy, understanding the negative impact on excessive consumerism on individuals, how we become a slave to consumerism. We want more and more and more and more, right? Human connection, talks of connection and emotional depths. How does product help to create that depth, or are we losing it? When I'm back home, I notice my son on Instagram. I want to ask him how his day at school was. He just say, it was okay, pa. That's it. Nothing more. Right? Why? Because the kid is caught in his Instagram reels and he's posting stuff. He's looking at stuff from others. So how does technology play a role in the way it impacts human connection? Prioritizing human values, empathy, creativity, critical thinking, right? Today we talk of EHP, education in human values and all that. We have these value-added programs, right, that NEP asks us to do, right? So this is a great novel that makes us think on those lines. Questioning assumptions. The novel encourages designers to challenge the status quo and explore alternative visions of the future, right? If this is the way my product or my technology is, how is it going to affect? The person who came up with AI, artificial intelligence, did he ever think that this is the way it's going to impact people? IoT, machine learning, right? Do we know how it connects? So these are the things that we need to look at. Iterative design again, ethical considerations, especially in domains like pharmaceuticals and services such as airlines, right? Do you look at the way people connect to a product? How do you design that? And long-term, future focused. Remember, I told you that design thinking also is future focused. So how do you think of the long term when you're designing things? Now, coming to movies, just thought I'll share. I mean, we are also inspired by movies and novels. So I don't know how many of you have watched this movie called Minority Report, starring this gentleman, Tom Cruise, right? Wherein they have this very interesting dashboard wherein, you know, he pushes things together, this dissects and slices and dices things on a digital screen just by touch, and you know he starts getting a lot of data. Inspired by that, in our organization, we have come up with reports. We have come up with ways to generate reports that can easily be done by creators or by the consumers of that data. Right? You don't need a coder at the back end. You can just drag and drop things, and you can create new dashboards. So inspiration is there from all across. That said, a little bit from poetry as well. We are coming to the close of this session. Poetry is another great inspiration to design, right? The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. And the poem talks exactly what you see in the picture. The dilemma that a person has in choosing one way over the other way, right? Decision making. Now, what inspiration can design thinkers get from this? Prototyping. How do I prototype? How do I decide whether my route that I'm doing is correct or there is some other way to do that? Right? We have a phase called divergence and convergence, brainstorming and converging to one idea, right? So these methods kind of get reflected in this poem. So if we read the poem, if we understand the spirit of the poem, can we get some message from it that we can consider? Or look at this very popular poem by William Blake, a slightly older poem, right, about a poison tree, where it talks a lot about the importance of communication, right? So you know that the poison tree is a metaphor for anger and what anger can do to a person if that anger is not released, if it is not showed. But then sometimes if you go beyond the way in which it should be, it creates issues, right? So it also talks about expressing anger the right way. It talks about suppressing anger. And if you suppress that anger, what happens to that one beautiful looking apple at the end of the day? So a lot of things. And just quickly, the last 3-4 minutes, right? If you're looking at other sources of inspiration, one of my favorites personally over here, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, right? He talks about a submarine called the Nautilus, which travels a distance of 20,000 leagues. Very, very interesting story. And today and this novel was again written in the 1800s, right? At a time when probably people were still thinking about submarines. I believe the first submarine was actively used during the American Civil War. It was called the Turtle. So this came a little after that, but he's so futuristic. Jules Verne talks about a mechanism in that submarine. It's called the Nautilus, right? Incidentally, that is the name of the first nuclear submarine in the world, which was built by the US Navy. So Jules Verne talks about how out of seawater, fresh water is made, right? And today we have desalination plants. He talks about how hydrogen from seawater is taken away and how that powers the engine. So those of you, my friends, who have not read this novel, please read it. Or if you want to watch the movie, you can also watch the movie. But the novel is fantastic. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant novel that talks about how technology can be in the future. And today, as we are talking, all these things are happening. Today in technology, there is a concept that Indian Navy is thinking called AIP, air independent propulsion, which basically means instead of a diesel engine that conventional submarines have, or nuclear power, is there a third way in which you can generate electricity so that the submarine can run? This gentleman thought about this 200 years ago. Think about that, right? Another classic by Jules Verne, From the Earth to the Moon. This talks about a club, a gunnery club, a club where people like to fire guns and all that. And one gentleman says, can I use this power to go all the way to the moon? Right? And he creates a rocket like the one that you see on the left. But the beauty of this, my friends, and this is where, I mean, sometimes I don't know if he's actually seeing the future. The protagonist and his friends, they go to the moon. The journey to the moon happens exactly as it is happening today. We talk of trajectory, we talk of orbit and all that, right? When we watch an ISRO launch. The same thing happens in this novel. And they re-enter. When they re-enter, something called a parachute open. It lands in the ocean. And there are ships nearby that picks up the astronauts. Exactly how you see Apollo 11 and all these other space missions that have happened, right? Ditto. How could this guy do that? I don't know, but there's a lot to learn from such books. Or Isaac Asimov, when it comes to technology, especially in this book called Foundation, right? The use of robotics, the use of artificial intelligence in robotics, something that we are seeing increasingly today as the days go by. Another novel called Looking Backward, which talks about money that you don't have, talks about credit cards in a rudimentary way. But if you're able to read between the lines, that's exactly what Edward Bellamy says, right? How do you spend money that you don't have? And probably finally, Back to the Future, a classic movie of the 80s that spoke about the flying cars. And today, we are talking of the flying cars. A lot of research actually happens about flying cars, right? Once upon a time, remote control planes were toys, and today we call them drones and UAVs and all that. So that is what technology is. So just to end with that, I think I just have about 5-10 minutes left. There is inspiration all across. When we look at solving a problem, when we look at opportunities, when we look at the customer for whom we are trying to work to solve their issues, I mean, one of the best sources of inspiration is literature, right? Whether it's English or Hindi or Tamil or Telugu or Malayalam, whatever it is, right? Because literature talks about human beings. And end of the day, we are solving societal problem, a human being's problem. Where else can you get better inspiration than from literature? So with that, I thank you for this opportunity. I hope I was not ranting too much. I hope I made some sense, but
It was very engaging and interactive, sir. I always draw an inspiration from you. You are drawing inspiration from the literature, how to put the thoughts forward the way you do.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I
The
hope the
platform
others
is,
were able to connect as well.
yeah, sir. I was about to ask if anybody has any doubt, clarification, question, appreciation, anything. The platform is open for all the participants. Ma'am, your voice is feeble, a little louder.
Is it fine now?
Ma'am, it is coming from a distance.
I don't know.
Now okay, now okay. Now okay.
Clear, ma'am.
Yeah. I thank Mr. Ramakrishnan sir. I should thank you. You have very sincerely tried to justice the platform where you are delivering, incorporating literature, a lot of poetry, novel fiction, and how that can be connected to design thinking. I appreciate your sincere efforts, sir. I really like it. And also, you started with by saying curriculum designing and then went on to literature. As a student of design thinking, I am also, along with Poonam earlier, a batch of person who attended design thinking. I can
Yes,
directly
ma'am.
relate this to classroom instruction, sir. It's my own contribution to your point, sir. This is directly related to classroom instruction. As a person who is doing research in ELT, who has done research and supervising people in English language teaching, I could find the design thinking tremendous connection to the classroom instruction, day-to-day classroom instruction. For example, we could start by empathizing, doing research on learners' goal. What do they need from us? From there, the empathizing starts stage one and define their needs and their wants and ideate, brainstorm all the possible methods we could deliver and then go for a prototype and test. So this suits tremendously well with the classroom instruction. Thank you for the session, sir. More
Thank
than
you.
since we teach engineering students, we don't much focus on literature part. And also literature is a very personal thing. And I cannot say this is a good book and that person might not think so. That is my opinion. So it is better to go for the learning
Absolutely.
experience, facilitate learning. That is what is expected from us in an engineering college where we deliver certain things. To a low proficient student
Sure.
in boosting the self-confidence or improving the language skill, to an elite student improvising by asking them to go for storytelling or able to empathize with the audience. So that is why we work on. To my knowledge, literature is too personal. I don't know whether I'm correct. I cannot say this is a best book in the world. The other person might think it's a boring thing. So we cannot go
Absolutely.
on.
It's a very
But this,
subjective question.
yes, yes. This one very well suits the classroom instruction. My day-to-day class, I go for designing 5 stages of design thinking. And if I implement that in each and every meeting I talk, in each
Wonderful.
and every class I go, I can apply it as a student. I'm a 2019 batch design thinking student, the first batch from SRM.
Okay. You had come for the reverse presentation, ma'am.
Yes, yes. This is Uma Makeshwar. That Maithili ma'am on that day came. I was giving a presentation. You
Right.
people appreciated it.
Right. Oh, I
Thank
wish
you.
your
Thank
camera
you.
was on. Sorry. I couldn't recollect you by your name. Maybe
Yeah, maybe I am
I would
not
by your
switched on.
face.
Maybe I don't know whether you remember. Maybe by facing. I am just switching on the camera. It's not working. Okay. Right.
Oops.
My
But now
camera.
I do remember. I do remember.
Yeah. Could you see
Oh,
me? This is Uma
yes.
Makeshwar. Yeah. Thank
I
you for the
do.
presentation. Sir.
You and a sir were a part of the team when you made your presentation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
On
I
that
forgot
day.
the sir's name.
Yeah. Thank you for
Correct.
this presentation. Wonderful thing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
I totally agree with Uma ma'am.
True. I mean, see, end of the day, students are human beings. How do we connect with them better, right? To make their lives better, to make the learning experience richer. That's what it is. I
Monica
think,
ma'am, you can ask.
yes.
No, I'm not going to ask anything, but I just piece of appreciation, particularly to the coordinators for having arranged you, sir, for this particular talk. Indeed, this was a brilliant session, and we enjoyed your talk, like particularly the examples that you had showcased with the design thinking was really awesome. And to be really frank, it was really an engaging session and thought-provoking one as well. And I hope the listeners would be able to employ whatever you had said in their real-time, lifetime activities in the
It'd be wonderful if
classroom.
they can.
Awesome, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for the session.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think there are no further questions, sir, and I have no adjectives left. Whatever I had thought to give you after your session, it has all been spoken by both my colleagues. It was really very inspiring, interactive session, sir. Like the way you connected with us, and even luckily the novels which were chosen, we are already aware of, and we are teaching those novels. So it really connected. It
That's
synced in
purely
that.
by chance.
Yes,
Purely by
yes.
chance.
Thank you so much for this engaging session, sir. Especially your unique insight, like in how literature can influence, how it can inspire the process of design thinking. It was really thought-provoking, and truly we are grateful to for your time, grateful for your expertise which you have brought in this session. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all the participants as well for your active involvement. As we conclude today's session, I would like to invite you all for tomorrow's 5th day of our faculty development program, where we look forward for another exciting and insightful session. Have a wonderful evening. See you all tomorrow. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye,
sir.
sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.